Dear speakers, mentors, mentees, and participants, welcome to our second mentorship webinar. The title of today's webinar is Development of Learning Objectives in Mentorship Programs, and we have speakers here with us who will share their knowledge and experience on what we need to consider for the success of a mentorship program and while developing learning objectives. My name is Tsion Yohannes, and I'm the chair for the Center for Gender Equity at UGHE, which is leading UGHE's mentorship program. Today we have 5 speakers with us, and our first speaker is Professor Agnes Pinaguajo. Professor Agnes Pinaguajo is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. She previously worked as the Executive Secretary of Rwanda's National AIDS Control Commission, as Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health, and as the Minister of Health. She serves as a senior advisor to the Director General of WHO, senior lecturer at Harvard Medical School, adjunct clinical professor at Dartmouth. She is a member of multiple editorial advisory and board of directors, including the Foundation Board. She is a member of the US National Academy of Medicine and a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. She has published over 190 peer-reviewed articles and was named among the 100 most influential African women of 2020. Welcome, Professor Agnes. Next, we have Dr. Assange. On the next slide, Dr. Assange is a senior scientist and the head of research training at the Medical Research Council in the Gambia unit at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Following his PhD at Brunel University, Dr. Assange joined the MRC unit in the Gambia as a Rockefeller early postdoc research trainee. He was also appointed as an international senior scientist and group leader for HIV immunology in the viral diseases program, which he later led as interim head. Dr. Jaye is a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences and has received various professional recognition awards, including the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine Directors Award for Excellence and Innovation in Developing Students as Researchers. Dr. Assange was appointed as the head and senior manager of research training and career development at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in 2016. On the next slide, we have Dr. Claire Baintun. Dr. Claire is the program director for the executive program for global health leadership at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Dr. Claire is a clinical consultant in global public health, a senior leadership advisor in public health, England, and a director of global leadership programs at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Previously, Dr. Claire worked as a regional NGO manager in West Africa and with WHO collaborating centers as an academic clinical fellow. In addition to her qualification in psychology, the political economy of development, conflict and human rights, international photojournalism, public health and medicine and surgery, Dr. Claire has completed studies with the Institute of Leadership and Management and is a trained mentor and accredited executive coach and accredited assessor and facilitator for emotional intelligence. On the next slide, we have Dr. Paul Cadets, who is an associate professor and chair of the Executive Education Center at UGHE. Dr. Paul has served as the director of graduate and undergraduate programs in global and public health in various universities, including Leiden University in the Netherlands, the University of Liverpool in China, and at Marshall University in the US and Drew University. Most recently, he served as deputy director of the Center for Global Health at Zhejiang University in China. Paul has a broad educational and clinical background as a medical anthropologist, nurse practitioner, critical care nurse, and acupuncturist herbalist. He also works at the intersection of international health and development and holds a PhD in international development. Our last speaker would be Dr. Ayode Alakija, who is the former Chief Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria. She is currently the Global Advisory Board member of WomenLiftHealth. Dr. Ayode is a globally renowned authority on bridging the nexus between humanitarian action and sustainable human development. As Nigeria's Chief Humanitarian Coordinator, she has served as a high-level interlocutor between state, and non-state actors at governmental and intergovernmental levels. She also spearheaded the first nationally driven and Nigerian-led national conversation on bridging the humanitarian development peace nexus and the Nigerian Nexus Resilience Strategy in consultation with the World Bank. Dr. Ayode is a strong advocate for gender equality and mentorship of early to mid-career global health professionals. Thank you, our speakers, for being here. It is indeed an honor to have you joining us. As I said earlier, the purpose of today's webinar is to discuss the role of learning objectives in the success of mentorship programs. We will discuss about how to institutionalize a mentorship program and also create an understanding of the mentoring and coaching spectrum. Speakers will also share with us how to develop learning objectives that foster critical thinking and share their experience on how learning objectives will benefit the mentorship program. I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting session, and I would like to invite our webinar participants, especially mentors and mentees, to send us your questions through the chat box so that participants can respond at the end. I would now like to invite Professor Agnes Pinaguajo to give us a welcome and a brief overview of UGHE's mentorship program.
Thank you, Tsion. Dear mentees and mentors, and dear participants, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome everyone joining us from around the world today to discuss and learn about development of learning objective in mentoring programs. This webinar is hosted by the University of Global Health Equity, a university based in Rwanda that focuses on equity and training future leaders who will emerge ready to develop and repair health services and social systems that leave no one out of quality health services, especially the vulnerable. Our objective extends far beyond our campuses and the Center of Gender Equity, which hosts this webinar. The Center of Gender Equity launched at the University of Global Health Equity the program called the University of Global Health Equity's Mentorship last year to provide tools, resources, and expertise to empower the next generation of young leaders around the world focused on equity and in turn help them to develop into future mentors themselves. The amazing panelists we have today are going to discuss and explore the strategies and solutions to improve mentorship programs. In the first webinar, we discussed together how mentors and mentees learn together and push the boundaries. We also discussed the barriers women face in global health, especially in the developing world and Africa. Today, we are going to take the next steps by learning about development of learning objective in mentoring relationships. We will talk about how to set goals earlier and understand options available. And these are important subjects for all our mentors, all our mentees. We will also discuss and learn about how to institutionalize mentorship through creating quality leadership, supporting the program, and creating framework needed for it. This will be useful today and in the future because, as we told you, dear mentees, we continue to grow and in a few years, take the role of mentors. Through the discussion to come, you will also learn about the different forms of mentorship and coaching, how to use this knowledge to make mentorship successful and effective, on how to understand the role of coaching to make mentorship successful. You will acquire knowledge on how and why you need to develop independent and strategic thinking for yourself. As a mentee, using this knowledge, you will gain a better understanding on how to adapt professionally and grow because your choice and implementation of your choices will always be in your hand. Dear mentees, I urge you to engage in this discussion. Listen well and take lesson. Same for all of us, the mentors. And we will learn also how the dialogue between mentor and mentees need to make all of us feeling good. I thank the speakers. I thank the Center of Gender Equity for organizing this amazing opportunity for our mentees and our mentors. I thank you.
Thank you for this overview about what our program looks like. We are really pleased with the program and look forward to having this audience again in subsequent webinars. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Assange to share with us lessons on institutionalizing mentorship based on his experience in research institutions. Welcome to the podium, Dr. Assange.
Thank you very much, Tsion. I would like to first thank the Institute, that's the Equity Institute in Rwanda, for inviting me to this, to be a panelist for this webinar, and to be part of this, among these eminent panelists. I hope Claire will join us because it's an opportunity to reconnect with her, as we are colleagues, as well as I had the opportunity to really attend one of the fabulous programs he organized on the Executive Global Leadership Program in London. So I will be giving, I just give a brief overview of institutionalizing mentorship from the angle of researcher leadership development, because the need to establish an environment of support and positivism to grow talents is getting more profound, particularly with regard to the West African universities, for two reasons. In fact, I've been so impressed by so far what you have done within your institution. So I hope this also will help, will add value to your program, because this is, yours is quite impressive. But for two reasons why there is a need to establish that environment and culture of mentorship through institutionalizing is that when you rank university, or you look at the ranking of universities, you will see that the West African universities are not among the very top ranks. They are more constituted by South African universities and some East African universities. That doesn't mean that the universities in West Africa are of low qualities. No, they still have the capability, learning capabilities. But what is now the metric of measurements for these things is that they've incorporated research environment and research space within that metrics. And this is what has been lacking for some time because it's being ignored. And why they ignore it is because this culture of mentorship has just faded away over years. The second reason and evidence for that as well is because when you look at the number of postdoctoral researchers or grantees, I've sat in many panels reviewing postdoctoral research grants, and West Africans do not do very well. So we decided to create a network to really see how best we can institutionalize mentorship. Next slide. We know the overall role of mentor is to promote the growth and the development of a beginning researcher to improve research learning. And this is more of a professional development focus as opposed to the supervision, which is job and performance focus and is more functional. But it's aptly embodied by the comments made by Oprah that a mentor is someone who allows you to see the hope inside yourself. Next slide. So in institutions, the need to develop researcher leadership is critical because we need to acquire critical mass of highly skilled, innovative researchers. And this should be evidenced by the high number of competitive grants, research grants that these young talents would be attracting. And in turn, this will improve the standard of the research institutions. where you would have more research output and research translations generated by the university. Next slide. So therefore, the process of building that researcher leadership is through a process of identifying and supporting these prospective talents. And it has to be via some frameworks. One is the researcher development framework, and a way of establishing the culture of mentorship, but must be complemented by supporting career development plans. Another slide. The next slide. So to achieve this process within a university, we in West Africa have been trying to do through our networks to institutionalize this by first getting management within institutions to first buy into this concept. And it needs to be supported. And so eventually this will give way to the mentorship program, and then it will shun the patronizing attitude that is commonly seen within institutions. And to do that, for the management to do that support, they have to allow the setting up of coordination and evaluation unit for career development. And also that unit will then be responsible to develop the guidelines and policies of mentoring, which will outline the goals and the objectives. And through that, they will also design the mentor-mentee matching procedures and framework. This can come in different forms. I've seen that you people have done very well into the matching, matching and procedures. That could be in our institutions we have developed where we encourage PhD students as well as postdocs to seek for the external mentors, and this is by maybe through sponsoring them for conferences and etc. Because sometimes it's essential for mentees to really look at people they would admire within their areas of specialization, help them, guide them through, through their development. Next slide. The other aspect of the institutionalizing, as I said, must be complemented by developing career structure and path to progression. This has been very likely because very often within universities, people will want to build their career, but will not have any transparent overview of where the career path looks or what the career paths will look like. In fact, in our case, we have, when we develop this structure, and there's a detailed structure where post-PhD career paths can look like and how they can be evaluated and what the expected criteria for promotions and developments are. Time wouldn't allow me to give in detail, but in summary, when we indicated that in reality, those PhD in research, scientific research, can go through either a research support specialist pathway where you are not expected to maybe attract grants, but you can still have a pathway where you will be evaluated to grow up to a level of scientist, but your role would be to support, because of your expertise, specific expertise, to support research, whether being a bioinformatics expert, a lab manager expert, or clinical trial coordinator expert, etc. So that pathway, people need to understand it quite well and how they can progress through that career. But then if you want to be a researcher, you have to decide that you are you are interested in creativity. You want to attract your grants. You want to develop. And the good side of that, though the downside is that there may not be job security. But if you are good, there is job security in the sense that all the grants that you apply for, you can factor in your international salary in it. But the aim is to really take a trajectory of development where you would be from early PhD, early postdoc to mid postdoc, to a scientist, to a project scientist, to a program scientist, to associate professor, etc. And if talents, young talents understand this trajectory, what it takes to really get into this trajectory, it really helps motivate them to, and helps also the mentoring program. Next slide. And finally, in that concept of institutionalization, that unit must develop training tools and resources to help process the development framework. And in our experience, we have provided, in that mentorship support, we have provided research and development framework resources. Particularly, we found the UGHE resource quite useful, very, very useful, and has helped us now evaluate the progress of many of our postdoctoral scientists who have now started winning grants. And these frameworks, people can start going through them or through these online, domain frameworks when you register, and the institution pay for the resources. And they are based on 4 domains. That's the knowledge and intellectual abilities, which normally is about your knowledge base, your cognitive abilities, and your creativity. Then the second domain is about the personal effectiveness, which deals with our personal qualities, your self-management, your professional career development. The last one, which is important, that early researchers must know research governance and organization. And you must take them through personal conduct, research management, what financing, funding is all about. And the last domain is about the engagement, which is about working with others, networking, communications, etc. But in addition to accessing these resources, the institutions should also help in developing certain key soft skills and hard skills for development. And these particularly important areas should be grant and paper writing skills, which we found very useful and has been very quite productive. But statistics is important, because you can't do scientific research without the knowledge of statistics. And we've been emphasizing on that very well, but also within the scientific research methodology framework, we give that framework concept and teach them about how to define questions, how to do research design, research analysis, and data interpretation. So these are skills that need to be incorporated into the whole framework when you institutionalize mentorship. Next slide. So I think at the individual level now, it's very easy, whether it's through matching or whether it's the mentee who sought the external mentorship, there is a framework which, that individual mentorship should begin, and the agreement can guide the agreement. And the mentor-mentee should understand the current reality of the mentee. That is, the mentee should ask where, and both the mentor and mentee should ask where the mentee is. And that gives the reflection, domain. And that reflection domain will ask the mentee, where do I want to be? And that together, in that relationship space, they would be able to have informed decisions of where the mentee how the mentee should get there. And then that will stimulate the actions from the mentor to impact on the mentee for those actions to eventually ask the questions how that mentee is doing. So that mentorship conversation, mentoring conversation is not difficult, because it's the one that guides the agreement and start off the mentee as a general plan in the individual mentor-mentee relationship that will impact knowledge, skills, insights, and values. So next slide, I think that's my last slide, because I don't want to take too much time. So in summary, research leadership development is now a contemporary thinking for development in institutions. And aspiring health research leaders must be guided through research leadership development framework, as well as in research methodology frameworks. And such guidance can only happen if the institution establishes a culture of mentorship. Next slide, I think that's the last slide. So I would like to thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Assange, for this very interesting discussion on mentorship and your reflections on what an organization needs to institutionalize mentorship program, and also your reflection on the mentorship conversation needed between mentors and mentees. As some of you who attended our last webinar may remember, there are different models of mentorship, including research mentorship. So it was a pleasure to hear Dr. Jay talking about with that focus on research in this panel. And now I would like to invite Dr. Claire, who will take us through the mentorship coaching spectrum and what it means. Welcome to the podium, Dr. Claire.
Thank you so much, Tsion. Can everyone hear me? Can you put your thumbs up, Tsion, if you can hear me? Good.
Yes, we can hear you.
So firstly, my apologies for some technical difficulties in joining. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to join the panel today and to hear and follow from my friend and colleague, Assange. And so, first slide, please. I'm going to talk to you about the mentorship coaching spectrum. I am a director of global leadership programs at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And as Assange mentions, I'm program director of the executive program for global health leadership. I'm a clinical consultant in global public health as my background, and I come to this working to support health leaders around the world. Next slide, please. So I thought it might be useful to start by just reminding ourselves of the distinction but overlapping interrelationship between counseling, mentoring, and coaching. Counseling is specific, and usually in our mentoring relationships, if indeed anyone needs some additional healing, the right thing is to refer, but certainly sensitivity to where any individual might be at a time is important, which can involve a certain amount of pastoral support. But here I want to concentrate particularly on that interrelationship between mentoring and coaching. So it's in order to get real depth and breadth out of that relationship, it is very valuable to be able to approach it with a coaching style in your mentorship. Next slide, please. So the essence of a great mentoring conversation relies on thinking about choice, awareness, and responsibility. Choice rests with the mentee, their decisions about what is important, their decisions on what are the objectives for them and their future and what they want to get out of their session. And it's the mentor's responsibility to do that and focus on what those needs are for that mentee. It is also the responsibility of the mentee to then enact decisions, to take things forward out of the discussions that they've had. They are not passive in this relationship. And then awareness. It's very important that the relationship helps the mentee to develop an awareness of themselves, of others that they're interacting with, and indeed the context in which they work or however it is, whatever arena it is that they're looking to flourish. And the mentor is in a strong position to support them to get those insights. Next slide, please. So what I have here is the spectrum, as I'd like to call it, from the directive approach of a mentee who is listening to a directive mentor, and in which case the mentee is going to be relatively passive. This is where the mentor will be sharing their guidance, their experience, talking to their own journey through their career. At the other end of that spectrum, you will have the non-directive mentor, and that will mean that the mentee is much more active in that conversation, and the mentor takes more of a back seat. This way, the mentor is encouraging and asking, prompting, probing questions, but then listening to understand, reflecting back what they hear. And it is important and valuable to be able to step up and down this spectrum to get the very best out of that mentorship relationship. It takes some skill and it takes some experience to be able to know when to transition up and down, but it is well worth the effort. And that makes the mentoring relationship learning for both sides and more fulfilling as a result. Next slide, please. So this slide is busy. The key words here is only those in bold: topic, goal, reality, options, and wrap up. T-GROW, we call it. This is just a framework for you to use. The additional questions that I've put as spider diagrams around those will be your own. You'll develop those. This is a tool for the mentor, but it's also useful for the mentee to be aware of it. And it structures the mentoring relationship conversations. So, for example, the topics that you might choose would be about career progression, about interest in leadership, potentially about dealing with a relationship at work, which might be causing some conflict. It's really those learning objectives, those objectives of it comes from the mentee. Goal here is about setting objectives that are realistic. So your SMART objectives might come in here. Some future visualization of what you want to achieve. What are the objectives for your mentoring relationship? Reality follows from there, where you actually check in. Really, so what do other people think of where you are? What do other people think of what's going on? What's the impact on your organization with your proposal, and so on? Options, what have you tried? What happens if you go down this route, or what happens if you go down that route? And then wrap up. How confident are you that you can take forward what we've agreed and discussed today? How committed are you? What are your timeframes that you're willing to commit to? Next slide, please. So the art of enabling others to have their own insights is really what I'm trying to communicate here. So in this image on the right, it captures the leader, the mentor, who is looking directly at the mentee. They're not looking at the box on the table. That box is representing the issue, the goal, the objective that the mentee has come out with. The leader or the mentor here is not looking to resolve that problem, to identify what they think are the solutions. That's for the mentee to do, and the mentor's focus is entirely on the mentee to see what their processing is, what questions you can ask to support them, to move them forward, to stretch them, and to strengthen their resolve. Next slide, please. Maya Angelou said something along the lines of, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Mentoring someone is an absolute privilege. I really hope that all of you will enjoy your journey on this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Claire, for this very interesting explanation and the range of coaching and mentoring approach. I really found the essence of mentoring conversations in this panel very interesting. I hope the audience has a better understanding of the coaching mentoring spectrum now. May I also ask participants who have any questions to please type your questions in the chat box. Going forward, our next speaker, Dr. Paul Kadetz, is going to give us a short presentation on designing learning objectives to foster critical and independent thinking. I am sure that many of you would find this presentation useful even beyond this mentorship program for your academic and other programs. Welcome to the panel, Paul.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. And next slide, please. And I'm very honored to be a part of this esteemed group of speakers. The last quote in there about enabling someone to have their own insights, that's a very good jumping point for what I'm going to discuss. When I was first presented with this question of learning objectives, I thought, I like learning objectives. I care about learning objectives because I've designed many programs and I live in a world of learning objectives. But why should other people care about learning objectives? Well, I'm going to argue in this presentation that not only is learning objectives integral to how we're helping to foster the knowledge, the learning, the education, the life of our learners, and if they're practitioners of their patients, but also how it impacts society. Next slide, please. I will start in the dark ages when I worked in critical care at Vanderbilt University Hospital. And I had a patient who had cystic fibrosis, a young woman, and she had just been extubated. And she was very anxious about the fact that she was breathing on her own without the respirator, understandably. And she was starting to have some problems with her oxygen levels. So I spoke with the intern and I said, well, what do you think? And he said, I think we should give her haloperidol PRN as needed. Haldol was something that was commonly prescribed 4 patients in ICU because they were basically older patients. And very often they were sundowning, they were confused, they were agitated, and we gave them haloperidol. It didn't seem right for this patient. I said, are you sure? He said, haloperidol PRN. I gave her the haloperidol as needed. It was not helping. It was towards the end of my shift and I was very concerned. I came on the next day and she was re-intubated. And I checked her chart and it said haloperidol PRN was given. I did a little research and I found out that haloperidol is the worst thing you could give for a patient who is having breathing problems because it's a bronchoconstrictor. What you really would want to give is, as you see here, nebulized fentanyl. So I presented, this being a evidence-based medicine hospital, I presented the intern with this information. I thought he would take it on board. I checked her chart, his chart, the patient's chart a week later. And as you can imagine, the patient was still intubated and was still being given haloperidol as needed. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And so is this merely an outcome of the intern's culture on that particular unit? Is the intern just doing what everyone else does in terms of prescribing? Or if we look at the bottom of this, what is called Bloom's taxonomy, is it that the intern was taught in such a way that all they did because of their testing was respond, was remember and regurgitate information from a textbook or from a teacher, and that they didn't get to a higher level? Maybe they got to understanding and application, but they didn't get to analysis, and they didn't get to evaluation, and they didn't get to create. Next slide, please. So our learning objectives are intricately joined with this graduated growth of knowledge that we see in Bloom's taxonomy. If we only focus on, for example, our learner describing or explaining, we're not really getting beyond that lower level of remembering or knowledge or understanding. And we really want to bring all of our learners to a higher level, especially practitioners who have the responsibility of other people's lives. Next slide. And so part of this, we have to be aware that not all of our learners are starting in the same place. Our learners are sometimes have strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in other areas. So how can we bring them all to a same level, as we see here on the right of the screen with equity? How can we bring them all to the same level where they will be able to advance to these critical thinking learning objectives? If you go to the next slide. Well, one way is that we may have to stay at these levels of understanding and application for a while for certain learners before we can bring them up to analysis and evaluation and design. But we have to bring them up to these higher levels, because if we don't, we run the risk of falling into the trap of our intern that I described. Next slide. Part of understanding what is going on is understanding how knowledge is constructed. Knowledge, according to Donna Haraway, is produced as an outcome of situated relationships of power. And similarly, Bridget Jordan, an anthropologist, describes equally legitimate parallel knowledge systems. Usually there'll be one system that overcomes these other systems. So let's say you have patients who are practicing local practices, are using herbs, etc. Well, usually the dominant system, of course, will be the biomedical system. So again, we see the power here that the dominant thinking system, usually of the global north or the West, is what will dominate in what we learn. Next slide, please. This was really exhibited very nicely in research by Meryl Singer, an anthropologist, who looked at the production of how we understand alcoholism. And he showed that the way we understand alcoholism is directly related to power. So the US government, especially in the 20th century, funded almost all research in US universities. And up until about the 1970s, research on alcoholism did include research that looked at social factors that were impacting alcoholism. However, after the 1970s, which is coincidentally the same time that we had the introduction of neoliberalism, which is an economic model that believes that the state is not responsible for the individual is responsible for themselves. So I don't think it's coincidental that at this time in the mid-70s, the funding shifted, and only that research that was looking at alcoholism as an individual, due to individual factors, would be funded. So we have the funding happening for individual factors. Therefore, we have a predominance of publications on individual factors, meaning this appears in textbooks, meaning this is what students are taught, meaning this is how we understand alcoholism, and this is how alcoholism is treated. So I think this is a really strong example of this idea of the production of knowledge. Next slide, please. And we can also see this in Antonio Gramsci's idea of hegemony. According to Gramsci, by creating and disseminating a universe of discourse and the concepts that go with this, we're defining the standards of what we are to consider to be true, beautiful, moral, fair, and legitimate, that is built by those who are in power, and that prevents those who aren't in power or the subordinate classes from basically thinking their way free. Next slide. And you could think of this in terms of, if you're a fan of Keanu Reeves and the movie, oh my God, I just forgot the name of the movie. The movie Matrix, The Matrix. Okay, getting out of the Matrix. This is a picture from that. It's the same idea, is that you're locked into this world that has a specific way of thinking. Next slide, please. I had a senior moment there. So what we're seeing is our intern engaged in thinking that was not critical, that was at this lower level. And therefore, he did not really have an ability to consider or understand beyond what was being done or beyond what he was told to do. So to have critical thinking at these higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, it is engaging in independent thinking. And I'm arguing that it's also creating or fostering independence. An independent thinker challenges the normative ideas, the behaviors, and the ways of doing something just because this is the way it's done in a given group or society, just as Haldol was given to all patients who were irritated on the floor. Next slide. And if we did not have independent thinking, we would never have gotten to this point. We wouldn't get to the point where we are now, and we wouldn't get to the points where we need to be innovative, to work our way through technology and other means out of some of the situations that we face, especially in the current climate, with climate change and with the current pandemics. Next slide, please. But what I would want to leave you with is, not only do I believe that the way that we helped our thinkers to process knowledge and to think outside of the box is potentially harmful to the individual and harmful really to patients if we're practitioners, as we saw in the example of the patient with cystic fibrosis. It also does something to a society. And if we are not creating independent thinkers, are we creating a dependent society? Are we creating a dependent state? And are we creating ultimately a dependent continent? There are many people who would argue this is the case. Last slide. So I would say that learning objectives, as I took it very broadly and dramatically here, that learning objectives are really essential to consider both for the mentor and the mentee, because it really ultimately is the knowledge that we're going to foster. Are we going to foster knowledge which is just repeating what everyone else does, or are we going to foster knowledge that helps us to be independent thinkers and helps us eventually to be not only successful practitioners, but successful at a state level? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for this engaging presentation, Paul. The case you brought in and the Bloom's taxonomy you explained has encouraged us to look beyond taking information to transitioning to critical thinking while developing our learning objectives, and also the importance of encouraging mentees to identify higher learning objectives through fostering independence, which is really very interesting. Again, participants who have any questions, I encourage you to type your questions in the chat box. To wrap up our set of presentations with some experience and thoughts on how learning objectives affect the success of mentorship program, I would now like to invite Dr. Ayuri to take the podium.
Thank you very much, Tsion. Gosh, thank you to UGHE and your entire group for inviting me to join this. I feel almost like a fraud because it's such an excellent initiative to match mentees, not only just match mentees to mentors, but also to coach and teach what exactly mentoring is about. That I've spent all my time scribbling madly and writing notes, learning from my esteemed colleagues on the panel. So it's just been wonderful for me. It's been really rich. I think just like parenting, at least my experience of parenting that I keep getting wrong every day, nobody really comes to sort of mentoring role knowing what to do. And that's what's so beautiful about what we're doing here and what you all are doing at UGHE. You know, it sort of tends to be foisted upon one. And, you know, somebody meets you at a conference or sees you in a certain setting and thinks, oh, this is a great leader, this is a great speaker, this is a visionary person. You know, therefore I'd like them to be my mentor. And as Claire showed us with her slide, which actually if we have it, I'd love to bring it up. I think it was her first slide. You know, the counseling is not necessarily the job of a mentor or the role, and neither really is coaching. A mentoring role is very specific. And, you know, oftentimes we fall into this, you know, oftentimes you're at a low point in your life or your career and you think you need counseling really, so but really what you then reach out for is a mentor. You're looking for a mummy or a daddy substitute in many ways who's in your own career line. So I'm going to really speak very briefly, because we don't have very much time, about how I think the objectives, you know, and Paul did, gosh, what amazingly broad view, and then bringing it in right at the end into the Bloom's taxonomy and into those actual objectives. You know, what I feel, you know, Paul spoke to with those objectives was really power in many ways. And I think one of the things we take not for granted, but we don't really understand when we're looking at learning objectives and choosing and pairing up with a mentor is the role that those power relationships have. And, you know, as you spoke to Paul, I think I wrote it down, you spoke to power differential and expectations in one of your slides. I think for me, as I look at how I've related both to mentees probably really badly and to mentors probably equally poorly, is that, you know, one needs to find the right expectations in those objectives, in setting those objectives. And that's where I want to start. I mean, Tsion asked me before this session, you know, would I change the title of my talk in any way? And I said I would want to speak to realistic objectives and realistic expectations, because I think oftentimes, you know, we get to a frustrating, I'm speaking directly to the mentors and the mentees now, you know, you get to a frustrating place, you know, when those expectations are completely wrong. So it's so important to set your objectives very clearly and to have clear expectations on both sides, which again, I keep going on to why this is so wonderful, because people keep saying, oh, you know, we have a mentorship program. A mentorship program is all well and fine, but, you know, what do I do? What am I expected to do? What are the expectations of me, and what are the expectations of the mentee? So that is one thing, really realistic and clear objectives. The other thing is, you know, I think Claire raised this about defined timelines along that mentorship journey. I think that also is really important. You know, what am I expecting out of this? You know, do you want me, am I to be your mentor for life? You know, am I your life coach forever? Are you in a stage in your career where you're trying to go from being a student mentee into a career professional space? And once I get you, you know, be it through sponsorship or through encouragement and through, you know, that guiding coaching side of things to a certain point, Do we exit that relationship? I think also those are things that cause quite a bit of confusion in people's minds. So I'm trying to be quite practical about this and say, well, what exactly is it that you're looking for? It needs to be clear in that in the laying out of your own objectives. I think, when we talk about power differential and expectations, often what a mentor / coach does can be interpreted from a perspective of perceived authority. And that again to me speaks to trust. And I think, as for me, I want a mentor and a mentee to really sit down and put their learning their objectives to get down together. Do I trust you in this process? How much do I trust you in this process? I'm literally in many cases laying my career in your hands, and not just my career, because it becomes quite an intimate relationship. There is no way, as I loved that slide of Claire's which talked about the counseling aspect of it, because there is no way that it doesn't become oh my gosh, somebody really upset me at work and I really feel like I should have gotten that research grant, or I really feel like I was right in line for that promotion, or I should have been invited to that conference. Why am I not a speaker? And it then behoves the mentor to help guide that conversation. So there needs to be a vulnerability and an openness within that relationship. And for me, in putting down objectives, it's almost too clinical, which is why I didn't myself actually want slides for this. I wanted to speak, to sort of say that, well, you write down learning objectives. It's a very human thing, having a mentor. It's a very personal, interpersonal, intimate relationship. And trust also becomes, for me, very, very key. Some of the things I wrote down is that you need to look at the confidentiality of your relationship between a mentor and a mentee. What are the perceptions that they have of you, be it institutional, if you're within the institution or outside the institution? Why are you looking for a mentor? What are you expecting them to do for you? But there's a clear need for confidentiality and deep trust within those relationships. What are the agreements we have between each other in terms of our communication? How often do we communicate? I've had mentees who feel like they can, in my early days, you text me all times of day or night. We need clear boundaries to ensure that a relationship like that can work. Because it's important, just like any professional relationship. I can be friends with you, Tsion, but I also have, our friendship is outside of our professional relationship, and those boundaries need to be clear. So we're talking, again, I go back to my topic, was how do learning objectives affect the success of a mentorship program? I think having those clear boundaries set out at the word go are a really, really important part of that mentorship journey. The expectations are sort of also both internal and external. If I say to Professor Agnes today that, Professor Agnes, next week I would like to be the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I know that you can totally make that happen. So, I would like you to guide me in that process and help me to get there. She and I have an internal process that entails, but then she then says to me, you're going to have to find some external support to get you to that. So you and I have both our roles to play. Again, something I think Claire referred to very, very clearly. That is totally outlandish, and maybe I should say I want to be the President of the United States, could be even more outlandish, but they're clear roles and responsibilities. But between her and I, we've had a conversation where she says, Yodi, that sounds really crazy, but I'm your mentor. I can either get you some counseling or a psychiatrist because you need some serious help, or I can say to you, well, you might not get right to the top of that tree, but perhaps we can get you to be a DSG, or perhaps we can get you to be an executive director at some other organization. This is how I'm going to help you. But then that confidentiality is between us, and that trust is there. So she knows, she's helped me to rationalize and to rework that learning objective of mine within that mentorship journey, as well as helping me to get there on my journey. But in doing that, I have revealed to her that I'm slightly nutty. I've revealed to her that I'm, you know, but that I trust her to hold that. And I know that within her wider circle, she's not going to go and talk to the next person she sees and says, oh my God, that girl's totally and completely crazy, because we have developed that trust relationship. I'm really conscious that I don't know how much time we have, that we're almost, yeah, okay, we're at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to stop there. I mean, we could go on forever, but thank you for including me. This is just really amazing, and I've learned far more than I have said today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yodi. Yodi, if you do not know her, is a strong supporter of UGHE. She has actively led the mentorship breakfast session at Women Leaders in Global Health Conference of 2019, which was hosted by UGHE. We really appreciated listening to your thoughts about setting realistic objectives and expectations, defining timelines for mentorship, and the importance of clearing expectations from the mentors as well, and the issue of setting boundaries. So it is really interesting. Coming to our Q&A session, we have, I'd now like to go through the set of questions that were sent through the chat box. We have just taken one question for each of the speakers, and they can maybe respond in 2 minutes each, given our time issues. The first question is forwarded to Dr. Claire. What are the dangers of overleaning on coaching rather than mentoring, if any? Let me read to the questions.
Thank you, Tsion. I should answer now?
Okay. Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yes, a very good question. And as Yodi has just pointed out, mentorship and coaching are distinct. And I was talking about that intersection and the benefits that can be done by using a coaching style to your mentoring relationship. So certainly if I talk to the executive program that I lead, we have distinct roles for mentors and for coaches. And so the executive coach is there for personal, professional, stretch, fully confidential relationship. The mentor is there as someone with relevant expertise to share and to buddy up. And they may develop a long-term relationship, sharing new research, new opportunities together in their careers. However, I will ask mentors to use a coaching style to their mentorship relationship because it allows for much deeper, richer conversations that are led for the needs and match to the values of the mentee themselves. So to address your question, I don't think there's any drawback in using a coaching style to your mentoring relationship, but it is useful to understand that there is a distinction there and to know why you are bringing in those coaching skills. Over.
Great, thank you, Dr. Claire. A question for Dr. Assange. How would you approach teaching postdocs to become mentors while working to provide them with better mentors too?
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very good and important question, because mentorship shouldn't be restricted to the seniority of being a mentor to the mentees there, but there's what is known as peer-to-peer mentorship. And you can encourage this, first of all, we do this by encouraging, first of all, to share fora, such as the journal club, or other, shared professional associations, where that peer-to-peer mentorship will now engender itself. And you need to encourage that because mentees can learn from each other adequately, in how certain values and certain insights can be shared to fit their, their development goals. So yes, that is important.
Great, thank you, Dr. Assange. Dr. Paul, a question for you. Someone said that you talk about strengths and weaknesses and how best to bring mentees to the same level to advance critical thinking learning objectives. So the question by the participant is, how long does that process take, and is bringing them to the same level a necessity?
That's very interesting. Is it a necessity? How long it takes? I mean, it depends on the individual. Is it a necessity? Yes, I think it is a necessity to prepare people to think critically. I did my master's and my doctorate at Oxford, and I learned that everything that I was taught before then in the United States, where I was just regurgitating information and memory, well, it's true, was irrelevant. It wasn't going to help me to think for myself. And you can't get out of Oxford without really, thinking for yourself and supporting that. And so how they did it there, which for the last 900 years, and Cambridge as well, is they have tutorials. And they meet with either one or two students, and they work through where they need to develop, so that you're not working with an entire classroom of students at the same time. You're really focusing on one or two students, and there's nowhere for that student to hide in a tutorial session. So I think tutorials will offer a way to help people to come to a certain equitable level. And I would say, yes, I do think it's necessary to reach a certain level to be able to think critically. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. And Dr. Yodi, how do mentors effectively reevaluate their own power dynamics to help connect more meaningfully with their mentees?
Wow. That is, that's a big one. It's a great question. I think a huge level of self-awareness and a huge level of self-awareness really comes to the table. When somebody asks if you to be a mentor, I mean, the word that comes to mind is accepting it as a real privilege, and the humility that comes with, I don't actually know much better than you. I'm just in a different place. I think as I grow in life and I'm mentoring both professionally and also in a personal capacity in my life, I find that I learn more and more from, at least personally, from people who are my mentees, from people who are younger than me on a daily basis. They have different things to offer, and that it's not I'm not the one with everything to offer. I think it's a symbiotic relationship. And so that for me brings a natural check to that power balance. I mean, I have a 23-year-old daughter who I think teaches me really every day more and more how little I know, which is really scary. But, that for me has been a big part of my journey. Perhaps when you have younger kids, you sort of think, okay, I'm teaching somebody who's younger and what have you. But redressing that power balance comes from a sense of self. But I think it also, from the mentee side, there's a responsibility there not to, as we tend to be very much in the African society as well. I think that's also part of it. We're very hierarchical. We're very almost sycophantic in many ways. It's like the person who is the mentor or the senior or the boss is just like, I'm not worthy. And therefore that brings an unhealthy balance to that relationship. So I think it's on both sides. I mean, but as you're choosing, if you're a mentee, as you're choosing and finding a mentor, you would need to try and match yourself with somebody who you again, it's matching. It's part of your objectives. It's matching yourself with somebody who you feel comfortable with, being vulnerable, but also saying that, look, how does this power relationship work? What do I have to offer you? Because you have a lot to offer me, and finding a balance thereof.
Thank you, Yodi. Thank you, our audience and speakers, for your presence and active engagement through the chat box as well. I see there are more interesting questions, and we will follow up on them with the speakers through email and get back to you. The Center for Gender Equity really appreciates the speakers for their time, for sharing their knowledge and experience. And we look forward to continued engagement in our programs. I would also like to notify the audience that the webinar is recorded, and the full recording will be available on UGHE's YouTube and through our social media links here, Twitter and our website shortly. So please check those out. Some of our mentors who were not able to join the meeting because of conflicting schedules will also benefit from accessing this recording. Thank you all, and have a good day. I know we are running a bit, we are a bit delayed, so I really appreciate your presence here. Thank you and have a good day.